Then we'll have take a break for refreshments and a chance for everyone to take a look at the silent auction items, the silent art auction as well. And then we'll resume and have the challenge. This month is pens, any kind of turned wooden pen for the Irish Fest, and then show and tell, and we'll try to wind up here by 9 o'clock and get out of here, okay? So, without any further ado, let me introduce to you the president of the Kansas City Woodworking Guild,
Mr. Craig. For a second?
Oh, that's right. That's right. I'm sorry, Sean asked for a minute, so.
All right. We got the Irish Fest coming up at the end of the month. I've got the sign-up sheet right back at this table. So if you are figuring on coming down, you want to make some time available, we're going to be turning down there. You can bring stuff to turn, or if you've got stuff you want to show or you want to give us so that we can sell, because it's the biggest money-making event we got now for the club. So hopefully we get a lot of people turned out. You can sign up for as little as an hour if you want to. It'll get you into the Irish Fest free. It starts at 4 o'clock on the 30th, and it ends on the 1st.
You might also want to mention, for folks that haven't been there before, there's also
it's down at Crown Center. We're going to be over in Washington Park, which is where the art part is, and so I'll be right back at that table.
Great music,
yeah.
Guinness tent, Jameson tent.
And we've got stuff to turn, too.
Are you going to wear that T-shirt?
Yeah, I'm going to wear this T-shirt all weekend. So, anybody got a question about it?
They got beer.
Maybe.
Irish.
They got Guinness. Sure. They got Guinness, too. And Jameson's. We're not too far from the Jameson's tent.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Okay. Craig, president of the Kansas City Woodworkers Guild, in addition to volunteering his time at Woodcraft. And a lot of experience, in addition to being husband, father, grandfather of what? Five. So that's where a lot of projects go and so forth. But Craig has probably forgotten more about finishing wood than most of us will ever know, so he's going to share some of that with us tonight. So take it away, Craig.
Right, so first of all, can you hear me?
No.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Is this in the right spot? There's two of those.
I'm going to turn off.
I have a green light. Okay, is that better? All righty, there we go.
Great.
All right, well, I am Craig Arnold. I'm the president of the Kansas City Woodworkers Guild, and I'm also a volunteer at Woodcraft. When I was asked if I would like to come do a presentation on turning, I said, I'm not a turner. If my wood spins, I'm doing something wrong. And so I kind of thought about it. I said, well, there's some of the things that I do on flat wood that can easily translate to round wood. And I know that most of the finishing on turned pieces is done off the lathe. And so a lot of these techniques that we're going to see tonight can be done off the lathe as well. And I'll kind of go through a process that I use when I decide what I want to do for a finish on something. Now, I happen to be married to my design consultant, and she will tell me what she likes. Because we'll go out to Nebraska Furniture Mart maybe to buy TV or look at computers or what have you, toaster ovens, but she always stops and looks at the furniture. And she says, oh, look at this, feel this. Isn't this a beautiful color? So I learned that people buy finish. They don't buy mortise and tenon joints. They don't buy dovetailed drawers. They don't even know what those are. But they buy what they like to touch and what they like to look at. So I teach that in the class. I kind of harp on that to the students that, well, I'll just finish it. I get a lot of customers coming to the store that say, I have worked 4 months on this crib for my granddaughter. She's due here in a week, and I want to finish it this weekend. I'm like, no, you're not. When they describe what they want, no, you're not. Not this weekend. Maybe in 3 weekends you'll have it done, but no. Good finishing takes patience. If you find your poison and you like the looks of it, keep doing it. But if you want to expand what you can do, there's all kinds of great techniques. I'm going to move around here. I started woodworking with my grandfather, who's a master furniture maker from Sicily. And his name was Sam Mortarano. Nice Irish boy. Right? But he did his own finishing at home, and I learned a lot of that from him as well. But over time, I kind of got bored with my woodworking because it all looked the same, and that's because the finish. Once I started reading good books, sorry about that, reading good books on finishing. This one's called Foolproof Wood Finishing for Those Who Love to Build and Hate to Finish. Boy, did that describe me. I love building furniture. Well, Terry Masacci, who wrote this book, this is the first edition. The second edition is out, and I'll never give this book up. I've got little tabs and notes and everything written in here. The second edition has a nice bright white cover on it, nice finishing photo on there. And all the products have been updated. Some of them are no longer available, so she updated those products in the second edition. I read this book from the beginning, surface preparation, how to sand wood. Come to find out, I was sanding all wrong for so many years with a random orbit sander. Terry tells you to start with the sander on the wood, turn it on and off on the wood. And if you have a variable speed sander, stay in the middle. So mine goes 1 to 6, I stay at 3. You start on the wood, you stop on the wood. You move about 3 inches per second, and you overlap by 50%. And that's sanding. But there's other surface preparation as well. So her book goes through surface preparation, through coloring wood, glazing wood, top coating wood, rubbing out the wood. And she defines that whole process as the finish. So when someone asks me, oh, that's a beautiful chest you've made there. What's the finish on that? Well, I started with a shellac wash coat, then went to an amber dye stain, followed by another shellac wash coat, glazed with gel stain. The color was antique cherry. Another shellac wash coat, glazed with black to hit the nooks and crannies, a shellac wash coat to coat that, and then 3 coats of armor seal. Brushed on, wiped off. Let it set for 3 weeks, and then did a satin or pumice rub out. Finally, a coat of wax. That's the finish. And they're like, no, what's the, you said top coat armor seal, is that a polyurethane? Yeah, that's the finish. That's what I want to know. I'm like, okay. Well, I have a lot of fun with the customers, and believe me, when you leave the store, we talk about you.
We talk about the perks all
Yeah, oh, I can imagine. Yeah, there's, yeah. Often I'll tell you this story. We have a few new people at the store, and Aaron, who's a young guy, he's in his 20s. I told him, I said, you'll see there'll be a car pulling the lot, and you will look around, and you will be completely alone, because we know who's in that car, and we don't want to wait on them. And sure enough, that very afternoon, I saw a car pull in. I just like, just took off. And Gary Kepko there at the store, he kind of meandered back into the back of the store. And Aaron says, as soon as I realized I was alone, I was in trouble. All right. How many of you have stained wood before? Okay. What kind of stain did you use? Was it just like a wood stain? Minwax? Oh, cringe. You notice in that can of wood stain, even Minwax, there's kind of a sludge in the bottom. Those are the pigments. They're earth mined, dug up out of the ground, color matched by very visually acute people. And then the color that remains in the vehicle is the dye. So pigments are great big. And you'll often have to look at the can. General Finishes does a great job because they actually tell you what grit to sand to. So this is an oil-based liquid wood stain, and it will say on the back of the can, sand no finer than 220. If you sand finer than that, the large pigments have no place to go. Nope, that's going to be a problem, isn't it? Let me take that off there. The large pigments have no place to go because you've sanded too fine. But the dye, which is man-made and this big, will color the wood. So when you have a very open pored wood like oak or ash, hickory, the pigments are what are lodging in the pores of the wood and really giving punch to the early growth in the wood. The adjacent wood, the late growth, has a few pores in there, but it's primarily being colored by the dye. So in a pigment stain, there are both pigments and dyes. There's also dye stains that have no pigments, and they color wood fairly evenly. When your wood gets darker, your dye color gets darker. Where it gets lighter, your dye color gets lighter. And we're going to use both those, a lot of those techniques here tonight. Have you ever worked with closed poured woods? Cherry, maple, birch, anything like that? Okay. Have a little problem staining it? What happened?
It's like putting down a piece of glass or something.
Well, maybe you sanded too fine. All right. Generally, they blotch. Closed poured woods, when the grain, the wood pores come to the surface, the capillary action of the wood draws the stain deep inside those areas, but the adjacent flat wood, I'm going to kind of move around because there's people over here I haven't seen yet. The adjacent flat wood has a pretty even color to it. And so that blotching is pretty indicative of closed poured woods. Again, cherry, maple, birch, pine. I heard somebody else say give one. So, yeah. So our first exercise we're gonna do is actually in blotch control. All right. There are three primary ways to prevent blotching. The first one is to use a pre-stain conditioner, and that is nothing more than a natural or clear colored stain. And it has to be used within a certain time frame. I put this on, let it set for 20 minutes, no more than 30 minutes, and then I apply my color stain on top of that. And what this pre-stain conditioner is doing is it's being sucked down into the pores of the wood so that when the color stain comes in, that color just sits right on the top of the pore. Does that make sense? So the pre-stain conditioners, the capillary action of the wood is drawing the pre-stain conditioner down into the pore. So when I come across it, while it's still damp, with my color of stain, it's just sitting right on the top of the pore. Okay, got that? All righty. That is my least favorite method for blotch control because never fails, the wife is screaming bloody murder upstairs. I'm like, shit, I got to go upstairs and deal with this. If I let it dry, I've lost the benefit of blotch control from that pre-stain conditioner. So I don't use that. One of the ones that I do use is a glue size. Now, glue size is a centuries-old technique. You take a regular woodworker's glue, or used, is that me? All right. What they used years ago was hide glue, horse's hide. They make glue out of it. And it's 1 part glue to 4 parts water. Mix that up, paint it on. The capillary action of the wood is drawing that glue down into the pore. You let it dry overnight. You let the wood, you give it a light sand with the grit of sandpaper your stain wants to be used with. Wipe off the dust with a microfiber cloth, and then you're ready to stain. And the goal is that it not blotch. Glue size is very good on cherry most of the time. I can't figure. All right. Birch is one of the woods that I have most trouble with blotching, particularly like with birch veneer plywood. Ugh, just awful sometimes. The other method of blotch control that I use is a shellac wash coat. And the important thing with the shellac is that it has to be wax-free shellac. This is my dented can. I get a discount on these, so feel free to come in and dent some more for me. But this is 100% wax-free shellac. The other products that are called shellac, these have the naturally occurring wax in them. So these will not work as a blotch control method. It will repel what you put on, what is put on top of this. So you don't want to use that. The nice thing about wax-free shellac, it sticks to anything and anything sticks to it. But in this can, it's a little thick. This is a 2-pound cut of shellac. You know what I mean when I say 2-pound cut? You get a couple of nods and a couple of blank stares, mainly blank stares. So at the shellac factory, shellac is delivered to them in flake form. And they will take 2 pounds of these flakes and dissolve it in 1 gallon of alcohol. Thus, you get a 2-pound cut. Now on this other shellac product, this is a 3-pound cut, quite thick. Makes a great top coat. So they took 3 pounds of flakes and dissolved it in 1 gallon of alcohol. Thus you have a 3-pound cut. But for blotch control and to use within finishes, I want to cut this even further. I want to make it a 1-pound cut. So I'll take 1 part of this and 1 part alcohol, mix it together, put it on the wood. All right. So I'm going to do a couple of those here. If I can find my opener. Here's that. And I mix these for the class, or I have the class mix them, because my finishing class is 3 days long, and so I'm going to try to do all 3 days here for most of the things tonight.
Greg,
Yep.
can you ever use a sanding sealer to help prevent blotching?
No, because they don't do what they're, that's actually used for, well, I'll put it this way. Shellac is billed as a universal sanding sealer, because you can put water-based products on it or oil-based products on it. A sanding sealer, what its primary purpose is to give the wood a light seal so that top coat builds quickly. If you didn't use a sanding sealer, you get a stronger bond of the top coat to the wood. All right, but your first 2 or 3 coats may look a little uneven because wood absorbs differently. Put a sanding sealer on there, and when I put my top coat on, I have a pretty even build with my first layer. So it's not really designed, what those things that are billed as sanding sealers are actually for use with top coats. Yeah.
What do you
That makes sense?
call a sanding sealer?
What do I call a sanding sealer? Something that I want to see immediate build of my top coat on. That you don't have to use them. They actually weaken the bond of the top coat to the wood. So if you need,
Bigger seal coat is a sanding sealer.
yeah, that's one way to look at it, because it can be used as a universal sanding sealer. In finishing, wax-free shellac is used for blotch control or to segregate incompatible layers. All right, and that's what we're going to use it for tonight. So, got my little, if you do a lot of finishing, you're going to collect every plastic container that you've got. Butter dishes, cottage cheese, yogurt, all that kind of stuff.
Where it has the wax, I mean, is that added wax to the shellac?
No, that's naturally occurring wax.
How do they remove the wax out of
It settles to the bottom. There's a great finishing product for turning. I can't think of the name of it right now, but it has a sanding sealer and a top coat, if you would. Yeah, and often when it comes to us, it's shaken up because of the truck ride, but through time it settles, and there's this white layer down at the bottom. That's the wax. They just let the wax naturally fall down to the bottom, and then they siphon off the wax-free shellac where it's settled out of there. So for those who don't know, the shellac comes from the secretions of the lac beetle. Yummy. Do you like M&Ms? Who likes M&Ms? The hard plastic coating is shellac. How many of you take any medications that come in capsule form? That's made out of shellac. So you're eating bug secretion. So, I had this one lady in class, she says, "Oh my God, I love M&Ms. I'll never eat another M&M again." So. All right. Yeah. All righty.
It's food safe.
Yeah, I mean, it is food grade. It's food quality. You get so many people come into the store hung up on, oh, it's got to be food safe. Oh, my baby's going to be gnawing on this. Well, all this stuff up here, once it cures, not dries, but cures, is food safe. You know, Armor Seal, which is an oil-based top coat, it might take 3, 4, 5 weeks for it to fully cure. You know, tung oil might take 6 months to fully cure. All right. So Chris is my able assistant tonight. This one you just have to spin by hand.
Oh,
Yeah.
Just turn it.
So let me go back over here for a second. Yeah, better do that. Yeah, paper towel work. When I do furniture at home or here, I'll buy the stock. I'll buy the stock, and the prettiest pieces of wood get chosen for the top. The next stuff gets for the drawers and the door fronts, and the rest of the crap becomes the sides and all the stuff that you don't see, maybe the back, that kind of thing. But there's always some wood left over. And I will kerf them like this, and that keeps the layers of color from moving from one thing to the next. And I'll actually start at the beginning with maybe cover up this one section and say, well, here's bare wood. And then I'll put on a shellac wash coat and then maybe a color here, and that would be on the whole thing. And then I'll cover this up, and then I'll put a glaze on top of this, and then a shellac wash coat to protect it all the way down. And then maybe another glaze or a top coat here. Because I always show samples to customers I build furniture for or my wife with top coat. Because top coat can really deepen the color, enrich the color, make the grain of the wood pop. Sometimes my wife doesn't want popping grain. And so when she finds something that she likes, she says, that's the one I want right there. I'm like, great, here, sign the back. And I keep these. And I keep the note sheet. I have a note sheet that has this same diagram on it, and I've written what I've done. And I've written the times I left on this antique walnut gel stain for 3 minutes. And the temperature was this, and the humidity was this. Because if I put this gel stain on for 3 minutes, today, in 6 months when I'm finally ready to finish the thing, it may be cooler and wetter outside. So my times are going to extend because the vehicles take longer to evaporate. And if you did not know, this is the universal sign for evaporation. I will do this quite a few times tonight. So we've got this is my board. Up here we've got some of these turning blanks kerfed off. And let's see. That's what I want to show. Yeah. And so what we're going to do on this one is we're going to put a shellac, no, you just spin it on there. So we're going to put a shellac wash coat on that panel right there. And we're done with that. Now, if you would get the poplar out and put it in here. All right. We're actually going to do a glue size as well. Maybe. No. Often have trouble getting the Yes, it does. You want to use Type Bond 1. You can also use Elmer's white glue, but you don't want anything that's water resistant or waterproof on there. All right. So get some there. And add, oh, that's what I forgot. All right. I need water. I'll be right back. All right. And so the shellac, I like using the shellac for blotch prevention because it dries in 10 minutes. I'm ready to go on to the next step, which is coloring the wood. The glue will take a little bit longer to dry naturally, but I've got my friend Heat Gun up here, and he's going to help us with some of the drying tonight. I always tell my students in the finishing class when I remind them, say the foam brush company, buy stock in the foam brush company. We'll use about 150 to 200 of these brushes in a finishing class. And so they're often like, holy crap. I'm like, yeah.
You're not washing them out, are you?
No, they're cheap enough that they don't need to be. I mean, and you really only want to wash out water base. I will with paint, like if I'm doing some stuff at home with a big foam brush, I'll wash it out. But like little brushes, I don't bother. It's water resistant. It will repel the water. Type Bond 3 will also repel the water. Now I've got, if you do finishing at home, get a trash can, put a liner in it because you don't want to be throwing this stuff away and have all this stain and everything on top of you. So here we've got a little, yeah, we can just spin this one by hand. All righty. So I've got this kind of loaded and go around and come around. See, poor technique there. Get on there. All right, so yeah, that's all covered. We're going to get the heat gun out and influence this to dry a little bit faster. One more.
Blow dries his hair wet in the morning.
Yeah. All right, that's good. This heat gun actually has a cooling feature. You turn it off and it cools itself off, so that way it doesn't burn anything up.
Is that a DeWalt tool?
No, it's a Wagner. I'm not sure who said that. So it's a Wagner. You could. I always pre-raise the grain on all my projects. You know, when I get done building a piece of furniture, I wipe everything down with alcohol. And I go through it with a fine-tooth comb and a nice bright light. And I look for planar chatter, you know, sanding swirls, anything like that. And I take care of that. Then I will pre-raise the grain just with clear, I use distilled water at home. I build with a lot of oak. And any iron content in your household water will gray the wood really quick. And if I'm trying to match something that I've done in the past, I certainly don't want to, you know, run that risk. And the iron content varies through the seasons. So it'll be higher in one part of the year and lower in another part. So your household water is pretty inconsistent. But a 99-cent gallon jug at Walmart is all you need. And you can mix all kinds of stuff out of that then. All right. So because this glue was water-based, or we mixed water with it, it's really not wise to use a water-based stain with it because the water here could lift that glue out of those pores. So I only use glue size with oil base. So Got some American walnut. And this is where I might want to wear gloves. Yeah, this is an oil-based pigment stain. So I always make sure in the class that I differentiate a pigment stain from a dye stain. No, there is a dye. There's both pigments, the large pigments, and the man-made dyes. So it's just easier to call it a pigment stain versus just a dye stain. I like to use Bounty paper towels for wiping off excess stains. They don't lint. And a good way to fold them up here, fold the ends to the middle like that.
Now, how's that? Ooh, that's nice. All right. Okay, so now I don't have to feel like I'm talking so loud. All right, so every time I wipe off the stain, I'm always presenting a new clean portion to the wood. That way I'm assured on bigger areas, I'm assured of getting a good wipe down of my stain. So we're going to take some oil-based stain. And give that a little stir here. And I can actually feel the pigments in the bottom, so I'm kind of stirring those up, bringing them up into suspension. And I just use a foam brush to put it on. So again, this one doesn't have to spin real fast. And I'm going to load this up here, get a lot of stain on there. Get it down the nooks and crannies. That dried, so we're going to put some more on.
I think a hamster could do this job.
Yeah, a hamster could do that job. To be a big frickin' hamster. Okay, so we're going to let that sit for just a little bit. And generally, your timing is dictated by the temperature, the humidity. There's a real high humidity. It's going to take a lot longer for the water or the oil to evaporate away off of this. The longer you let it set, the higher concentration of pigments and dyes are left behind. And so this has been about, and my timer starts when my brush hits the wood. All right, it doesn't stop when I'm done. So that's about, go ahead and spin that. Let's see here. Okay. Now, I don't think my glue dried very well. Can you take that out? And tell you, I'm not a turner. So. Oh, here, you want? All right. So go ahead and pass, just set it on here. So I don't think my glue dried very well, but I'll show you examples of blotching here. There's some, here, let me show you here first. There's some real dark areas up here on the top and down here along this bottom edge right here. Yeah, and so the glue did not seal that end grain in there very well. And so that's a great example of blotching. And dye stains blotch, pigment stains really blotch, so it doesn't really matter too much on your stain. Gel stains, which are a little bit thicker bodied, and they have really large pigments, they tend not to blotch as much because the pigments are so big they can't even get into the pores. And so you may have seen a lot of the Java gel stain, or these in the blue cans from General Finishes. They stick where you put them. They're great for refinishing cabinets because they're just going to stay right there. All right, so now let's put our cherry back in there. So some people can't wait on cherry to get dark. It will darken naturally.
How can you correct this?
Sand it off. Use shellac. And on this one, we're going to put the stain on both sections. That first section next to the headstock, and then the second section where I put the shellac. And this way, the hope is that you'll see blotched wood versus unblotched wood. So I like the shellac because it dries so fast. Go right on to the next step pretty quickly. And what's that? Only if I've got brush strokes in it. And I've gotten pretty good at using brushes. I'll talk about brushes here in a second too. So we're going to let this set for just a little bit longer here. So, anybody heard a good joke? I heard one the other day. And this is a good joke that you can tell kids. So, it's a nice, safe one. Why do cows have hooves? Anyone? Because they lack toes. You didn't hire me for humor, did you? All right, so this has been on about a minute here. We're just going to kind of lightly go across this. And kind of even that out a little bit. And come over here to our one with a little blotch control on it. Yep. Yeah, just real slow like that.
Chris, did you get stain on our truck?
I've got mineral spirits, I can get it off. Okay, so let's take that out. Yeah. Sorry. Oh, no, here, I want that. I want to take a look at it here. So here you can see it's subtle, but on this area right here, there's a little blotching right in here. When we turn that around, you can see it's pretty even. All right, so I'm going to pass this around. I'm going to need this back here pretty quick because we're going to do something else on the cherry. Well, let's go to walnut. That seems to be... so I'm going to stand over here on this side because I know some of these guys here, but when I say this, you know, lightning may strike. I think American walnut is an ugly wood. When they kiln dry it, they really bleach the color out of the heartwood. And that goes into the sapwood. And so the Sawyer has more sellable lumber, but he really kills the color in it. Now, air-dried American walnut is beautiful, deep, rich color. And so we're going to show you a technique here on how to enhance, you get some of that color back. And you can tell on this how it's almost got like a purplish hue to it. Doesn't have a really good rich color to it. So one of the things I like to use on that is a dye stain. And this is a dye stain made by TransTint. This one little bottle will make half a gallon of dye. It's that concentrated. And so you mix this 1 ounce to 32 ounces to get the master tint. And that's what I've done in this bottle right here. So in here's 32 ounces of distilled water, 1 ounce of TransTint dye, and 2 tablespoons of denatured alcohol. The alcohol makes the water wetter. Wow. All right. So now, of what? A wash coat of what? No, because this is an open poured wood. And so walnut is not going to blotch. Now it can, but typically it's not going to blotch like a closed poured wood would do. This color is dark walnut, and it is dark. Yes. And I really like to saturate dye stains. Really get it on there. And I'm going to take the heat gun to it here. So you can see how dark that's gotten just with that little bit of dye on there. And it's starting to dry out. We'll probably take some of that off of there. I'm just going to kind of pad off some of the excess here. So what happens here is that the dye will sink in between the early growth and the late growth on the growth rings. Because the surface tension has been broken, for the most part, it's sunk down into the pores of the wood. All right. So now I'm going to grab some 220 grit sandpaper. And you know, when you're using sandpaper, I'm sure you all know this, when you fold paper where you have the backing, the paper to paper, it's real slick. But when you fold it sandpaper to paper backing, it's not real slick then. Okay? So I know turners know that a lot more because they do a lot of hand sanding. Most woodworkers don't know that. They're sitting there struggling with their sandpaper, or they want the random orbit sander. It's just like, Okay, so now, to just sand off that excess stain. That should just, all right, so if that were off, there we go. Now try it. Are we plugged in?
Should be able to pull that, and it's not. Yes.
Yeah.
What did I do wrong?
It's a squirrel's ass. It's just up here.
Oh, there we go.
Push up, right?
Okay, so here we can sand.
Turn it off.
Again, I'm used to or accustomed to sanding.
A little faster.
Yeah, a little faster wouldn't be bad. And you'll actually sand this back to what is, in Terry's book, she'll call this clean wood. And the sandpaper will load up, so find another spot here. Okay, so that's 220 grit. Let's go up to some 400. Okay, turn that off here. All right. So it does have a little bit, get some of that dust off of there. So I always like using microfiber cloths to remove dust. Yeah, wash microfiber cloths without without fabric softeners, or dry them without dryer sheets. I don't know if you can see. From here, there's a difference in the tone. The pores are darker in between the early and late growth. There's a more depth of color in there. Can you move to this one just a little bit? All right. You can see how that's darker. Where am I going? Right through here. That this side right here is lacking in there. And so that's kind of what we're doing, is giving some of that richness, that depth of color back to it. So, any questions on that one? So you can put a clear top coat on that. That will really make that even pop more. Show you another one here. This one you get to work on. All right. I call this one the Christmas Eve finish. I actually read this in a book, a finishing book that was written in the 1840s. So they had a lot of really old techniques in there. And so this is beeswax. If you're friends with a beekeeper, a friend of mine has a bee rescue service, and he asked me one day, he says, "Hey, you want some beeswax?" And I said, "Sure." So I thought he was going to come out with a little thing of beeswax, and he'd come out with a 5-gallon pail. Boom. There you go. Have some beeswax. Wow. And so he collects it from the bees that he removes, the nuisance hives that he removes from people's homes. So for the Christmas Eve finish, I was going to call this the funeral home called and Grandma needs her urn, but it doesn't really roll off the tongue, really. You know, Christmas Eve finish works well. A little slower. Yeah, there you go. So take the wax, and we're just going to do this one right here. All right. You're just going to take some wax across it, and not a whole bunch. Yeah. So once you feel like it's pretty coated on there, yeah. So you can turn that off. Yeah, thank you. There we go. All right. So what we're going to do now, this is a French technique. It's called poncing. So I've got some fine pumice stone, and I've poured it into the cloth here. So you can see this little fine powder on here. I'm going to bring the corners together. And when you ponce, as the technique was described, it's not banging the pad down, it's flicking the pad over. And so we don't need it on for this. And so we're just going to ponce on some of this pumice on here. All right. Now to give it a little bit more depth of color, we're going to ponce on some oil-soluble powdered dye. It's important that it's oil soluble because wax is an oil. And this particular color is burnt umber. So we're going to pour some of that in there, kind of break up the big clumps, bring the corners together. Maybe. There we go. Get all of it down in there. Get it. There we go. And we're going to ponce on. You can see that brown dye showing up on there. And I always tell the students in class that this is a finish that Woodturners would really like, because they have to take their Scotch-Brite pad, which is where? Which is where? There it is. And they have to rub it by hand. Well, here, and if you want to do this, you're just going to hold that up against there and move it back and forth.
You want it on.
Yes, and it has to be on for this one. This is why we don't have nice things. And so I just go back and forth on it. Well, so what happens is that the heat from the friction melts the wax. And the abrasive, the pumice, becomes transparent in oil. And the added color is richening up the color of the walnut. And as you can see here, it's getting pretty nice looking. So check your pad. Now, if it starts to load up, just find a new spot on the pad then. And often, many of my students in class will say, okay, this is all I need to know, thanks, because they like the way this looks and feels once they're done. So we'll take this one out of the lathe here. And we'll pass this one around for you. So this is beeswax, because it has a very low melting temperature. It is fine pumice as an abrasive, and then the Gamblin brand oil-soluble powdered dye in burnt umber. So feel that and see, does that feel all right? Feel pretty good? Kinda? Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, let's move on to another one here. Oh, yeah, I'll take that. Thank you. Thank you. Got some, let's see what else we got over there. Let's grab the cherry. Up on this thing. Sorry about that. Can you still hear me though? Regrettably. All right. Yeah, we'll do the cherry, and we'll also do the walnut up here the same way. Many of you may have noticed the crock pot I have back here. I would advise you not to use your wife's crock pot or the one that's found in the kitchen. This was the one that was found in the kitchen, and I had to buy a new one for the kitchen. So this is boiled linseed oil. BLO. What's that? 140 degrees on high. Now I cheat. I boil water in the tea kettle, pour it in here, and then stick the bottles in and turn it on to high. So what we're going to do here is boiled linseed oil. No, I'm just heating it up. And that's kind of a misnomer. Where'd those towels go? Those white towels. Oh, there they are. That boiled linseed oil is never boiled. When they add the metallic dryers, it really froths, giving the illusion of boiling. All right. So now, why don't we work on this end, because this one's going to require a lot of sanding on your part. So I'm really going to saturate that. Just go ahead and spin that by hand. Or yeah, that's fine. All right, really going to get that on there. And now, while it is wet, I'm going to take my 800 grit wet dry sandpaper and sand this. And you know you are done when you have a little pasty slurry of oil
On the wood or on the paper?
on the wood. Now, doing this by hand, of course, you see that pretty quickly. Yeah, a little bit. When the hot oil hits the wood pores, the pores open up and really allow that oil to penetrate. I should watch what I'm doing here or take this away. Really allow that oil to penetrate deep into the wood. Now, as the wood cools, the pores will shrink and will dispel that oil, that wept oil needs to be taken off tomorrow with a white Scotch-Brite pad. And so generally I'll do this 3 or 4 times over 3 or 4 days. Hot oil, sand it in, come back in the morning, knock off with a white Scotch-Brite pad, and then do it again. And I might do it 3 or 4 times. And then my last coat is my little creation of 1 part boiled linseed oil, 1 part beeswax, 1 part mineral spirits. And this is a really nice creamy wax that finishes this off. Yeah. I mean, nothing new about it. Every woodworking school in the country has their own formula, and it's the same thing virtually. And so we've got that worked in there pretty good. Going to take a clean towel here. And this is the important part, is that you want to wipe off any excess, and you continue wiping until no more oil comes off on your towel, because that's also got a lot of sawdust in it too. So you're trying to clean that wood up. And so this is, actually, if you know who Tom Mosier is, he literally wrote the book on shaker furniture. And there's a young Christian Bexboot in there with what looks like a barbecue mop and a bucket on a hot plate of boiled linseed oil, and he's taking it and he's just mopping this hot oil on these big cherry dressers and stuff that they made there. You know, in the days before OSHA really cracked down on places like that. Okay, so go ahead and stop that one. Yeah, so feel that and let me know what you think. It's nice. Yeah. My wife calls this the buttery finish. So before you take that out, we're going to just put on a little bit of this wax here. We're going to pass it around. And so this wax is just real kind of creamy little wax.
How's it look if you're just putting it on plain wood?
We can do that too. Let's do that right next to it then. So we'll put it on over here. Oh, did I lose a chunk? There's plenty left on here.
You said beeswax, mineral spirits, and
Boiled linseed oil. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like every woodworking school has that same formula. You know, oh, this is what we invented. Bullshit. Everybody's got that.
if you watch YouTube, it's Captain Eddie.
Yeah. And like it's something brand new. Look what I did. I can show you.
Pretend it's new.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Okay. So go ahead and take that off. We'll pass that one around. So because I have been known to leave the crock pot on overnight, I always say that you are my witnesses. I have turned it off. Charlie was mad one time, the old manager at Woodcraft, he was mad when he saw that it was on when he came in the morning. He says, God damn it, you could have burned this place down. I'm like, all right, so I always make a point of saying, yes, I have turned off the crock pot. You are my witnesses here. So I don't want to go through that anymore. Okay, now we're going to do some other, let's get out that curly maple blank. Yeah, that's the one that Sean made here. Yeah. No, this is not green dye. This is honey amber dye.
Are we going to put much pressure on it?
Well, we got to dye everything. Maybe you can, yeah, go that way. There you go. Whoop, you need that move forward.
Looks like the last one. Well, the last one was so much my short-term memory.
we're just dying anyway, so we don't really need it on. Okay, actually, let's tape off that one section there. My tape roll. Tastes like chili? Yeah. Cool little tape cutters. You ever seen these? Called tadpoles. A little elastic band wraps around the cutter. I can just spin it back, and it keeps my tape up in the air for the next one. I make them. This is the 2-inch size. They make 2 other sizes beside that. No, Woodcraft does not. I bought those on Amazon. It's called the Tadpole tape cutter, and they make 3 sizes. Yeah, what's that?
Where might you find such a thing?
Well, I bought mine on Amazon. I bought 6 of them because I have 6, usually 6 people in the class, and they're usually taping off that little upper left-hand corner. And I can tell who's going to struggle in class. If they can't operate a tape dispenser, they're going to be in trouble. So, all right, so we've covered up this one section down here so you'll be able to see what the raw wood looks like. And now we're going to take, it's back behind you here. We're going to take the trans tint dye stain, and the color is honey, what's that? No, I'm just going to do this. And the color, yes, is honey amber. All right, put some more here. Now I can mix up these dye stains, and as long as I keep the jar closed, they'll last forever in here. So the purpose is to really encourage this dye to drop down into the pores.
Please drop, please.
Yeah. So I'm really kind of, and if you've ever worked with curly wood, you know that there's a lot of end grain sticking up out of them. All righty. So get that, drop that. And let's get some heat on it. Huh?
Does anybody do French polish anymore?
French, yeah. Yeah, I spend my Mondays at a place called Tudor Woodworks. Stuart Brown was trained in England, came up through the guilds system in furniture restoration and repair. Came to the United States to work on his master of furniture restoration in New Orleans. Katrina kicked him out. He moved to Texas, then he came to Kansas City and set up his place. And I work out there on Mondays so I can learn more finishing techniques. And Stuart does French polishing. It's a very labor-intensive application of shellac. Before he left England, the Queen's French polisher had to have shoulder surgery. And so the company he was working for was tasked with coming in to French polish the main banquet table, which is 8.5 feet wide and 63 feet long. And Stuart said that they had this contraption, kind of like you think of the Mission Impossible, where Tom Cruise sinks down, had this big harness thing on. That's what he had to wear as they moved him across this table. They laid down planks, plywood on the carpet, and this thing rolled down this table. And they put on 5 coats of shellac in 7 days. So it was so big. And he says that he'll eventually have to have his shoulders replaced because he did so much French polishing in England. In England, they actually call it British polish. They cheat. They start by putting it on with brushes, and then they go into the application with the pad. It's actually called a tampon. To put it on that way. So, but yeah, it was, 7 days of doing that. And the Queen was away, and so they were in there by themselves with 3 guards for, 12, 14 hours a day doing this thing. No, this was the banquet table was built back in the 1740s. Yeah. All right.
Say that's the proper way of doing things here.
The proper, well, that's probably not the way he'd want to do it again, but all right. So now we're going to cover up this part. This one will just kind of get you a way to show, to see the progression from bare wood to fully dyed to sanded, and then we're going to put on another color at the end here. So go ahead and turn that on. Let's see if I can sand this. And so the goal here is to sand back this to clean wood, where the dye is still down in the curl. Am I doing this right?
I think so.
Okay. I mean, my hands are in the right spot.
You're on the right side of the way.
I'm on the right side of the lathe anyway, right? People will come into the store and ask me, these real highly technical lathe questions. I'm like, I don't know. Let me go get you a turner here. But I'm really blessed on Sunday mornings. I have a group of turners that come up, and boy, I utilize them all the time. I'll bring a customer over, and they have this big deer in the headlights look. These are a group of turners here who know how to turn, and one of them will be coherent enough and won't yell at you, so I never pick Ed Maxwell. Won't yell at you. When you ask for advice. But I know Anthony's been very generous with his time on Sunday mornings to customers. All right, let's see what we got here. Yeah, not too bad. This is just 220, just to speed things along a little bit. So go ahead and turn it back on. I'm going to try to get this in right down here a little bit more. What's that? No? Okay, so go ahead and...
Close.
Okay, so I don't know if you can get in close. You can see that yellow is still in that curl area in there. See that? All right. Now we're going to use another dye stain called Dark Vintage Maple. And it's also a trans-tint product. But we are going to water it down. We're going to make it fairly weak. And it's going to give a really cool color here. And I just need a sponge here. It won't take much either of the color. Yeah. All right, so now, here, let's cover up this end, or this next one here. All right, so this is about a 10% dilution of that first color, or that second color. All right, now, I'm going to turn on the heat gun. Go ahead and, yeah. So you'll see a lot of musical instruments are dyed with on curly woods. They may use black and then come back with a green. They have a light green and a dark green because of the black in the curl. They'll do starburst effects on guitars. Okay. Okay, let's see how that works then. All right. So the neat thing about dye stains is that I can put on one coat, and if it's not good, once it's dry, I can put on another coat. Whoop, that's all right.
Do you ever use like a tack cloth?
No, I don't like using sticky tack cloths because the turpentine or its substitute will impede the ability of water-based products to adhere. All right. I just use a microfiber cloth, generally. Yeah, nice. So this is another second coat of this. I'll just go ahead and turn it on here. Yeah. I don't want that. Okay, now while we've got it on there, let's take some top coat and put on there now too. My grandfather, the furniture maker, had to make his own varnishes. And he would make them with turpentine and pine resin. Yep, on the chair. I actually need to have a lanyard made for that thing. What's that? Yep. Well, I told my wife one time she was using a 3/8" chisel to try to open a paint can. I said, honey, the 1/4" works better. Yeah. So my grandfather's technique for when he was doing furniture was he would brush on his varnish and let it set, as he put it, until the crinkle. That's what you're looking for, is the crinkle. And then you wipe it off. So he'd paint on his homemade varnish, and he'd let it set for a little bit, and he'd touch it with his finger. And his fingerprint would fill in. That's still too wet. Then he'd wait 30, 40 seconds, maybe a minute, touch it again, and it would fill in. He'd wait a little bit longer, and he'd touch it, and his fingerprint would remain. Ah, see, crinkle. Now we wipe. So with this oil-based on here, I'm just going to apply it. In fact, this Armor Seal from General Finishes was chosen by Fine Woodworking as the best wiping varnish and the best brushing varnish. And in fact, the author did a little sidebar on brush it on, let it set, wipe it off. And I said, well, that's the way Grandpa used to do it, so probably need a little bit more there. And I'm using, I think this is semi-gloss. This is the sheen. So, okay, go ahead and stop that. Now, take that out and we'll pass, we can take the tape off too. We'll pass that around. Now, I've just used oil base, all right? I don't want to throw this in the trash can because it could catch on fire, spontaneously combust. So I've got my little Folgers can here, partially filled with water, and my stick, and I just push that rag into the water. And when I'm done, I'll tape this up and throw it in the dumpster. How environmentally friendly of me. Yeah, really, you would want to just lay these out flat, hang them over your neighbor's fence, let them dry hard, and then once they're hard, you can throw them away then, without worrying about it. One of my, in fact, one of the guys in the class moved into a new subdivision, and they all have these wooden fences, but his was new and wasn't stained like all the neighbors. So 3 days living there, he said, I'm going to be a good neighbor and stain my fence. So he stained his fence, got it all taken care of, wadded up the rags, threw them over in the corner, came back the next day. So this was on Sunday, came back Monday night to find the fire department there has put out his fence. And he's like, oh my gosh, what happened? Well, The guy turns around and says, well, it looks like you'd stained your fence and left oily rags here. And, you know, it's the fire chief. He says, wow, fire chief comes. He says, no, I live across the street. What a way to meet your neighbors then. So, all right, what else do we have over there? We've got oak. Yeah, let's do some oak here. My favorite wood is quarter sawn white oak. I build a lot of arts and crafts style furniture. I've got a flat piece of it over here somewhere. And in fact, I'm going to do some of this on here, the same things that we do on this. I don't know if you can see the medullary ray in that wood there. All right. And you can tell this is quarter sawn because when you look at the end here, the grain's going up and down. And you can actually see the medullary ray are these little streaks going out here through the sides. It's actually, there we go. You can actually see them on here. And when those come to the surface, they form those little streaks like that on there. So medullary ray is a very dense part of the wood. Oaks typically have them. You'll see it sometimes. There might be some in some walnuts, but generally not too much. But on medullary ray, when you try to stain it, it's so dense it does not take a pigment stain. So if you want to color it, use a dye stain. And so this is actually one of the stickly finishes that we're going to do on here, where we're going to... Are we? Okay, so let's try this one for the last one here. So we're going to, again, start with the honey. On here.
But again, that's a dye stain.
Right. And so it's dyeing the wood fairly evenly. Let's see here. And usually when you get puddling on flat wood, you would just take a cloth and just dab off the puddles. You don't want to wipe it off. You just want to dab them off. All right. So you can see there how that dye stain has really colored that medullary ray in there, like that. You know, pigment stain wouldn't leave that coloring, that even color. But what we're going to do next is we're going to dry it here a little bit. Yeah. We're going to take our shellac that we made earlier. Now, we're not using this shellac wash coat as blotch control. We're using it to prevent the next product from bothering the dye stain that we've already put on. So this wax-free shellac can be used within a finish. I'm going to do these right along here. All right. And let's see if I can hit this real quick. Shellac brushes, I like the Taklon bristle brushes. I took a class from Ron Lomax here on box making, and he had a Taklon brush for putting on shellac, because we finished the inside of the boxes before we glued them together. And I went to Cold Snows, where he bought his brush, and said, I want a Taklon bristle brush. And the gal said, white or gold? I don't know, white. She says, okay, here we are. And I said, well, that'll be all. She says, $67. I went, what? So I'm cruising through Walmart in the art department, in the art supplies. And they have, I looked up and I saw gold Taklon. There's 2 of these in a bag for $4.99. So an artist with a palette needs to draw paint colors in and be able to evaluate it on the bristles. That's why a white one is so much more expensive, because they're very even, pure white. So, but these, we're just using it to apply these things on here. Okay, I need to get through here. Here, I'll let you keep doing that. So now what we're going to do is use a glaze. All right. Oh, but look, the can says stain. So what is a glaze? A glaze defined is color added to sealed wood. We've sealed it with shellac. The technique is glazing. I have a finishing book at home that gives you a formula for a particular type of color, and its instruction says, stain the wood with this, and it gives you all the stuff. Then about 40 pages later, the formula that you used on page 3, you are now going to glaze the wood. And glazing means I've sealed it before I color it. So people get hung up on all these words. There are products that do say glaze on them. They're just pigments, all right? And a little bit of dye, but they're primarily pigments, very finely made. But I like using the gel stains because I have a big, wide range of colors that I can glaze to. And gel stains generally don't need to be shaken or stirred because all their material stays in suspension. Yeah, all right. So what we're going to do here is just real slow. Now let me set this down behind you here. Oop, wrong one. I want to do this one. I'm going to put this stain on. All right. And then I'm going to do it over here on this one as well. And when you're staining, the goal of staining is to get the stain on the wood because your clock starts when you touch the brush to the wood for the first time. And on here, kind of looking at the time to make sure the, yep. Find a new clean spot. All right. Now over here, I'm just going to real quick wipe this off of here. All right. So here you can see where the pigment stain, the dark pigment stain, all right, lodged in the pores of the wood, but you can still see how the medullary ray is nice and bright in there. Kind of rushing this, but normally I'd leave it on a little bit longer to get a little bit darker. But you can see how that works in there. So now we can go ahead and take that out. Now in the class, what we do is also put top coat on these, so that way you can really see the top coat then. I will, real briefly, you can wipe on finishes, you can spray finishes. I've got my HVLP conversion gun. If you've got an air compressor at home, a conversion gun is great for that because it converts high pressure to low pressure. Gives you a nice even finish. For people who want to spray but don't want to invest a lot of money, the Prevol sprayer looks like this. I've added my little trigger here. $6.99, you have a sprayer. People ask how long does this cartridge last? And they will tell you that it lasts for 2 Adirondack chairs. I don't know how many square feet that is, but that's what they say it will spray. It was 2 Adirondack chairs. So, what's that? Yeah, pass that one around there. So normally we'd have top coat on that really makes that pop on those samples.
How much is this sprayer here?
This one?
Yeah.
I added these two things, which are about $7 or $8 a piece at Lowe's, water separator and an air gauge. This one's about $50. In fact, it's on sale at Woodcraft this month. So this is a gravity fed, so gravity literally lets the product drop into the flow of air. Has a lot of controls. I open up the air control fully and rely on this valve. It wants to spray between 28 and 60 pounds. I spray at 30, so I adjust my air to 30. And I set my compressor at 60, so that way I never run out of air. And I can adjust my fan shape. If I turn it all the way down, I now have a cone shape. So if I do spindles or legs on a table, I can do that, and I can ratchet it right back up to doing flat stuff again.
you found anything any better than, say, Bloxygen or something for preserving some of the top coat finish?
Well, Bloxygen only works on oil base. It doesn't work on water. And no, Bloxygen is the best thing out there. Now, if you happen to know a welder, you know, any of those heavy gases, because all it's doing is displacing the atmosphere within the can. It just has to settle on top. So.
Unfortunately, we've
yeah.
kind of run out of time.
That's all right. I'm sorry. I get excited about this. I could go on and on about this stuff. So my finishing class is 3 days long, and you actually leave with 8 pieces of wood like this, all different species of wood with maybe 3 or 4 different techniques on each board. And then your note sheets will reflect each board on there. I also teach the class out at Woodcraft as well. So I teach it 12 times a year, and I alternate months between here and there. So if you're interested, I'll be glad to talk to you after the meeting. Or if you have any other specific questions that I won't be able to answer, you can see me after the meeting as well. So thank you for your time and attention. I appreciate the invitation. Well, thank you. I'm sorry.